We are now in the realm of the mental image, and we're going to take it up as a way to show you how, again, using a process that takes a few seconds, that you can change your core beliefs and shift your whole life dynamic and your life experience. Mental imagery is an ancient tradition. It's been with us for thousands and thousands of years, has a long and distinguished history, was the major way of therapeutic practice up until the middle of the Renaissance, when life changed by a change in the paradigm in which we Westerners thought and still think. So before the time of Newton and Galileo and Francis Bacon and so on, we were thinking in a way in which the mental and the physical were one, so that we were seen as unitary beings and the consciousness was unified. The older paradigm, which I teach, is a paradigm, a model that has to do with the fact that the mental and the physical are intricately interrelated, and they're intimately interrelated, so that what happens physically is registered mentally, also emotionally, morally, socially, that we're a being who lives through these five aspects in true human relationship in the world, and that what happens physically is registered in all these levels, and then what happens mentally is also registered physically. It's the basis for why mental imagery works. Why should it work? How come we get such wonderful results from it, and that we can also see changes not only in our social life, in our habits, in our interpersonal relationships, changes in ourselves, changes in our moods, changes in our feeling states, but how come there are physical changes that take place that has occasioned a best-selling book that I have written called Healing Visualizations that has been around for 18 years? It must have some meaning and some value because it works. And it works simply based on the model that what happens mentally affects physically, just as what happens physically affects mentally. So we know that if we take certain pills, certain medications for a physical issue, we're going to have some mental changes. That's quite known. Steroids is an example of that. It's been prominent in the news. So there are changes that take place that are reflected back and forth. They are mutually connected to each other. That's the old model. The newer model, which has been with us for about 450 years, is that there's a distinct difference between the two, that they're not connected, and that the only thing that really is of worth and value is the physical, and everything else is really not necessary or doesn't have any real significance in our lives. I'm a practitioner of the ancient model brought into a new light. So mental imagery, as I've seen and what I've dedicated my life to in these 3+ decades, is to show how this process, which is inherent in our being, that we're born with this capacity and this talent, using it for ourselves, not having to depend on an outside, so-called outside authority or outside agent at first to effect a shift for us, can be used at any time, any place, in any setting, whenever we need, and takes only a few seconds, by and large. Why? Because the ancient model of healing is based on homeopathy as a significant healing factor, meaning that a micro input leads to a macro response. It stimulates a macro response. You don't need an acetylene torch to set off the fireworks in a fireworks factory. All you need is a spark. So that spark can do it, and in a way that we know destructively, unfortunately, sparks can create forest fires. So we only need a spark to create movement, and this movement is life. And what imagery does is creates an inner movement, and it gives an instruction in ourselves, an inner instruction through this natural and true language, the natural and true language of the mind, this inner language, this special language that we call the hieroglyphs of the mind, gives an inner instruction to us about healing. And so we tell ourselves through this language that we recognize inwardly, inherently, what to do. It gives a direction to the physiology about how to shift itself. I know it sounds somewhat difficult to grasp, but this is exactly what we see happen. So the proof, if you will, is in the pudding. So the fruits bear witness to the truth and efficacy of what I'm talking about, and I'm sure that many of you who have availed yourself of this process, either through my work or other people's work, or through what was in the natural laws, in which there are many imagery exercises, have seen happen. In fact, I've gotten a lot of comments, a lot of people have called me and have written to me from the natural laws, listening to that series, about how they use the process and what beneficial effects they've gotten from it. So this mental imagery process that we use now, which I've developed here, has a special tone to it that I wanted to communicate to you, because it is that fourth technique in the Phoenix process, which we can apply in daily life to transform our lives. And it's used to change, as I mentioned, any belief